Yo, what is up guys? Boy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. So this video is a quick little preview and I guess prediction for Fabio Wardley versus Justis Huni. Fight goes down this weekend, takes place in England, in Ipswich, at Portman Road, the stadium of Ipswich Town Football Club. Of course, Ipswich being Fabio Wardley's hometown. So this is a homecoming affair for Fabio Wardley. So a lot of pressure on his shoulders. Now, of course, originally he was supposed to fight Jarrell Miller, but Miller pulled out due to injuries, I suppose. A replacement was drafted a few weeks ago, and it turned out to be Justis Huni, an unbeaten heavyweight of 12-0, coming out of Australia. Good amateur, of course. In fact, when he turned pro, I was actually keeping a close eye on him. Now, as a pro so far in his career, he's looked good in certain fights, not looked good in others, shown signs of vulnerability, but he comes into this fight with the unbeaten record. He comes into this fight with a ranking, I believe. And all things considered, I think this is a pretty decent replacement for Jarrell Miller. It could have been far worse, in my opinion, but they had to, come up with some sort of an opponent because this fight is at a stadium. I believe over 20,000 tickets have been sold, so they had to come up with a decent replacement, and I think they did that. But I do make Fabio Wardley a relatively big favourite in this fight. I think overall he's looked more impressive in his pro career in comparison to Justis Huni. Don't get me wrong, Fabio Wardley's had a couple of shaky moments, most notably against Fraser Clarke in their first fight, which was ruled a draw. Also, even in the Nathan Gorman fight earlier in his career, took some shots in that fight, suffered a bad nose injury, which reoccurred in the Fraser Clarke fight, the first Fraser Clarke fight. But, when things go wrong for Fabio Wardley, he's not one of those fighters that looks for a place to hide. And that's one thing I've always been impressed with Fabio Wardley. Despite the lack of amateur pedigree, he doesn't let setbacks get the better of him. Sometimes he makes the wrong decisions in these moments, like we saw in the first Fraser Clarke fight, but he doesn't go hiding, which I like. I like that attitude. I like that mentality. And he's got a lot of good physical attributes to be a successful heavyweight. He's pretty quick, he's powerful, he's explosive. And, that makes up to a degree for his lack of amateur pedigree. Whereas, Huni has that amateur pedigree, but I don't think he's got the same level of physical attributes that Wardley has. First and foremost, Fabio Wardley is the bigger man. He's the taller and longer man here. Fabio Wardley is 6'5", Justis Huni 6'4". Fabio Wardley also looks longer in terms of reach, and I think that could play a factor going into this fight. I think the physical attributes of Fabio Wardley, much like throughout his career, is going to be a difference in this bout. The thing about Justis Huni, despite him having a good amateur pedigree, and like I said, when he turned pro, I was definitely keeping an eye on him because I saw him as a bit of a talent. And I watch his fights and he does things at times that are really impressive. Sometimes he'll throw some really good combinations, he'll throw with speed, sometimes he'll display a really good jab, sometimes he'll display some nice counter-punching. But when I look at him fight, he's one of those fighters that I've never really seen him put it all together in a complete performance. And not only that, I don't see him settle into a defined style. I still see him as an amateur who's boxing as a pro, more so than a guy who's settled into a pro style. Whereas Fabio Wardley, despite the deficiencies, despite the lack of amateur pedigree, and maybe lack of fundamentals at times, he does have a pro style. Justis Huni at times tries to box, at times he tries to fight, at times he tries to counter, at times he tries to fight on the inside, at times he tries to fight on the outside. I still see a guy who's trying to search for his style, kind of thing. That's the impression I get when I watch Justis Huni. And from what I've seen so far, I think that will be his undoing in this fight. I think in this fight he needs to settle to a defined style with a defined game plan. He's got the attributes to outbox Fabio Wardley for stretches. when he gets on his toes, because sometimes he'll fight out of a bit of a bounce and he'll pop the jab, and he does have a quick jab and a decent jab when he uses it. And we saw Fabio struggle with Fraser Clark's jab in their first fight, and Justis Huni is a lot quicker than Fraser Clark. I think Huni, if he's boxing on the outside and keeping it at range, he can have success. He can score with the jab, and he can win rounds. However, does he have the discipline? Does he have the defensive nous to do that for 12 rounds without being caught? And I think that's important because we've seen Justis Huni get caught in his career so far against Kevin Lerena, a southpaw cruiserweight who came up to heavyweight, and Kevin Lerena had Justis Huni badly hurt on a couple of occasions in their fight. Justis Huni had to really grind out that fight to get the win. You know, Kevin Lerena really pushed him close. I know Kevin Lorena's not a bad fighter. He gave Dubois a hard fight until he randomly swallowed it, but, you know, that fight had me doubting the chin of Justis Huni a little bit. I know Lorena's quick and he can catch you with shots unawares, but he's not a massive puncher. And again, you know, if Huni is boxing with Fabio from on the outside, yeah, he can win rounds based on that jab, but I'm not convinced he can be perfect, or he can be perfect enough to evade that right hand for 12 rounds. And when that right hand lands, I suspect that it will hurt Justis Huni. And one thing about Wardley, when he has a guy hurt, he really does go for it, and he's quite successful at getting the job done, so to speak. And I think that's the risk Justis Huni will have to take if he chooses to box this fight. Again, I think he's got the fundamentals and the talent to win rounds. I'm not convinced he's got the chin, the concentration, or the experience to do it for 12 without getting caught. I think Huni might be better suited, and he can fight on the inside. He can fight mid-range. I think he might be better suited putting the earmuffs on and actually trying to be the pressure guy. That's going to be dangerous when you're crossing that distance, when you're crossing from the outside to mid-range to the inside. You know, Wardley's got a very good right hand, which he can throw straight, he can throw looping, and he can uppercut as well. So Wardley across the outside coming into the mid-range is very dangerous. He can catch you with one big shot. But on the inside, that's where I think Huni can maybe smother Wardley. Maybe he can smother that power. Huni can let shots go off on the inside quite well. He varies it from body to head with decent speed. He can throw uppercuts through the middle. One thing I like about Huni is he does have a good punch repertoire for a heavyweight, both up close, mid-range, and on the outside. I think maybe his best bet might be to approach this fight as the pressure guy. I don't think Wardley would be expecting that. I don't think anybody watching would really be expecting that. And smothering the power of Wardley might be a good strategy. It's risky, much like I think boxing on the outside for 12 rounds is risky. But I think taking this fight to the inside might be an interesting strategy for Justis Huni. One thing about Wardley, considering his lack of amateur pedigree, his posture in the ring is quite impressive. But when it really does show, I think, is when he is fighting on the inside. I think Fabio Wardley, don't get me wrong, he fights on the inside, but I think there you see his deficiencies. There you see the lack of experience. He doesn't hold his shape that well on the inside. He kind of flails a little bit. He tries to trade a little too much. And I think up close in particular, that's where you could see the amateur pedigree of Justis Huni giving Fabio Wardley trouble on the inside, forcing Wardley to fight up close. Because inside fighting, for me, this is just from my perspective, as somebody who's trained on and off over the years, never had an amateur fight, but done a fair bit of sparring. The hardest thing to learn for me has always been inside fighting, just me personally. And you can see that in Wardley, I think, starting late, not having the amateur pedigree. We saw that in stages in the first Fraser Clark fight, even in the Gorman fight to a lesser degree. But I think that's where Justis Huni might have the highest payoff. Again, it's a high-risk strategy. I think it's a high-risk strategy because Wardley has that speed and power and explosiveness where he can switch your lights out or badly hurt you. But at the same time, I think that's where he's most vulnerable up close. Again, losing the shape, losing posture, losing balance, hands not being where they should be, head and chin not being where it should be. That's where you could maybe see Huni land a big shot, a big left hook or a big uppercut, etc. And really, for me, that's where I think Huni should take this fight, is up close. Of course, at times he's going to have to box, take a breather, reset. Sometimes he'll get caught by a shot and he'll need to take a little walk, maintain a bit of range himself. But I think primarily his focus should be on spending more time on the inside than on the outside or mid-range. That's what I believe. For Fabio Wardley, for me, he's most effective when he's got time and space to land his right hand. Low-key like Deontay Wilder. He needs that time and space. He really does. So for me, he needs to be taking the half step back. He needs to be maintaining range, popping out a jab, drawing the lead of Justis Huni. You know, it's all about the setup with Fabio Wardley. We kind of know how he needs to fight. Thing with Fabio is sometimes he'll make fights harder than they need to be, like the Fraser Clark fight, where he had all the advantages physically, but he kind of drew himself into a fight. He got drawn into a fight. I think Huni's got that same sort of style where that could happen. He needs to be a lot more switched on in this bout. He needs to be disciplined. He needs to be utilising his hand and foot speed, longer reach, taller stature, keeping it long and trying to draw Huni onto a shot. You know, there's another factor here as well. Fighting in Fabio Wardley's hometown, is that going to add more pressure onto his shoulders? Again, I mentioned that because of a lack of experience. But one thing about Fabio Wardley, he seems to take it in his stride. So I don't think that'll be a problem, but it's something to consider. Regardless, I see this as a fun fight. I think it will be fun while it lasts. I do. But I think the safe bet here is Fabio Wardley by stoppage. I'd say maybe mid-rounds, 6, 7, something like that, maybe 8, in and around those rounds. But I do think Huni comes into this fight with good attributes. He does certain things well that could give Fabio Wardley trouble. He's athletic in his own right. He's not a slow heavyweight either, by the way. He's pretty quick. But I think he'll be best utilising that up close, personally. But I do think he can give Wardley trouble. And I wouldn't be super shocked even if he won this fight. But I just think as a pro, Wardley is just a bit further ahead, personally. And I've got Wardley by stoppage in what I think will be a good fight for as long as it lasts. Competitive fight. Just to make a note as well, on the undercard, there is a couple of things to take note of. Interestingly, Mike Perez, if you guys remember him, he's fighting at cruiserweight against Stephen Ward. Stephen Ward recently beat Tommy McCarthy at cruiserweight. And Mike Perez is fighting Stephen Ward. 39 years old now, Mike Perez. I always used to like Mike Perez back in the day, but since that Briedis loss, he's been in no man's land, really. But he's fighting on the undercard. You also have Piers O'Leary, Irish prospect. He's fighting Liam Dillon for the European title, super lightweight. There's an Albanian heavyweight on the undercard as well by the name of Nelson Heiser. He's 22-0 with 20 knockouts. Interesting guy because he's 40 years old. He's fighting a guy called Patrick Corte. Patrick Corte is a German heavyweight who is basically a knockout for hire. I mean, Hughie Fury put this guy away, so that really says it all. Nelson Heiser is supposed to get this knockout. I think what they're doing is, I think Nelson Heiser is going to be fed to Moses Atauma. Heiser's fought on a few Queensberry cards before, and I think they're just kind of fattening him up for Moses Atauma. That's what I think is going to happen there. And lastly, we have the pro debut of Lewis Richardson at middleweight. Lewis Richardson was a bronze medalist in the last Olympics at Paris. He controversially lost to Marco Verde. So he's turning pro at middleweight. Usual fodder pro debut opponent. We'll see how he gets on. And also Dillian Whyte is supposed to fight on the card as well against TBA. So Dillian Whyte apparently is going to have a tune-up fight on the card as well, a stay busy fight. So but the undercard really isn't what I'm looking at here. The undercard, quite frankly, is quite weak, but I am looking forward to the main event. Anyway, share your thoughts below. How do you guys see the main event going? I've seen a few people actually pick Justis Huni, and I see a world where it happens, but I just think the safe bet here is with Fabio Wardley. But anyway, share your thoughts below. Beanie Guy Del Boy. Peace.